Hello, my name is John Holmes, and today I'm the purveyor of parts breaking power. We will be talking about the new Axial SCX10 II rig, the Vaterra Ascender, and the RC4WD Trailfinder 2, and doing some surface comparisons of the rigs and just giving the vague impressions that I have of them at this time. So we will start actually over here with the Trailfinder 2. It is probably the most scale rig of them all. It has leaf-sprung suspension with the dampeners here. It has a forward-mounted motor, so the electric motor mounts on the forward side of the rig and turns this spur gear, which goes through a 2-speed transmission. It has a drive shaft that goes to a transfer case in the middle, and then from there it goes to the axles. So the most complicated drivetrain of them, if you want to consider all the discrete pieces complicated. There's certainly many parts inside each of these transmissions, but comes with that 2-speed there and is mostly meant for good looks and maybe not the best performance on the trail. And I can at least relate from other people telling me that indeed it is not the most capable rig on the trail. Just from having a leaf-sprung suspension, it'll be very limited in its travel, and you won't be able to get over the edge of a rock and have your suspension sucked down and you pull the rig up the rest of the way. And so if you're looking for something that's maybe a scale replica of your daily driver, or you're looking for something that is more realistic to drive, this is going to be the rig to go to. A lot of people love this rig as far as the scale aspect. Now, it does have the least amount of steering on there as well, so along with the suspension, it doesn't have really the great capability of turning tight circles that a more built trail rig would have. So you can consider this more of like your daily driver that you get to take off-road sometimes. Now, next we go to the Vaterra Ascender. This has been on the market for, I guess, about a couple of years now. Don't quote me on that, but we've had this one in the shop for quite a while and have really enjoyed this rig. This was just a new release that kind of shook up the world as far as rock crawling and what you can buy off the shelf is concerned. Has great suspension travel to it, very plush suspension but not too much articulation, and out of the box they get pretty good steering. Now, we've had to go through and upgrade most of the drivetrain components on this because we installed a 3300 kV Puller Pro stubby brushless motor. It's a 4-pole 12-slot motor that is tuned for rock crawling. Now, it's a really high kV for a rock crawler, and so this rig just has more wheel speed than it needs, which is quite fun, to tell you the truth. But on the other side of that coin, it breaks parts, and it also induces a lot of torque twist on this vehicle. The 2-speed option that this vehicle has, we do not have installed. I'm personally not a fan of 2 speeds. I'll get into more detail about that here in a few minutes. But it is overall quite the capable rig for a ready-to-run either kit or pre-built for you. Also, just as the other vehicles has this chassis-mounted servo, and the bump stop on it from the factory is pretty good. We had to do a little bit of spacing on it, but overall the bump stop was pretty good for a kit, I would say. The steering on this is quite good as well, easily 45 degrees. And quite a capable rig overall. Again, we had a lot of fun with this rig. We've put it through a lot of paces, and it gets a lot of wheel time. It took a little bit of building up to get it to a stable point with the high power that we put in, but it takes it. The only downside to this vehicle that I could even complain about would be the low gear ratio in the axles. They only have a 2-to-1 ratio versus the 3.75-to-1 ratio of the SCX10 II or the 2.8-to-1 ratio of the SCX10 I. And so for any torque reaction coming from your chassis and your transmission, it is going to have a greater force on the chassis to roll it. And when we goose the throttle, you can see the front tire kind of pick up some, it tries to track a little bit to the side. But they got the roll center and the anti-squat and the general suspension setup of this vehicle extremely good. So considering that it only has a 2-to-1 reduction in the axles, the geometry of this rig is fantastic. I was extremely surprised at how well it drove considering the lack of axle reduction. So it certainly does not kill the performance of the rig. But it is probably the only downfall that the rig has. Maybe in the future Vaterra can release a different ring and pinion set that will give us more gear down, but that is to be seen. I'm not sure if that is feasible with engineering. Now we get to the SCX10 II, which is just released by Axial. going through the features that it has, that it shares with these rigs, is very similar. It has the chassis mounted servo on there. It has a nice scale looking axle. It also comes with full metal links just like the Vaterra Ascender does, but a few advantages that it has. It gets a lot more steering. I think the overhead camera should get that side to side. That it does get about 5 degrees more steering in there. I think it's pretty close to 50 degrees. With some modifications, the Axial unis will get 55 degrees or more. I've heard of people pushing beyond 60 degrees. It kind of looks crazy when your tires are turned that far, but it's possible. Now, along with that is the higher gear reduction, 3.75 to 1 gear ratio on the axles. That will allow a much faster drive shaft speed, which will induce less torque to the axles and chassis as the reaction torque is putting your force through the drivetrain. That is going to make the drivetrain tuning of this much, much easier. So if we simply threw the axles from this rig into this rig, you could actually gain a good bit of performance and reduction in torque twist. You may need to re-gear up front where your motor and spur is, but that is not too big of a deal. You can just throw on a bigger pinion to compensate for the gear reduction here and the gear reduction in the axles. So it is going to be a long-term advantage for the Axial rig, the new SCX10 II, to have that additional gear reduction. I am very excited to get it on the rocks and see how it performs, because I've built many rigs myself in my life, and the ones that I did the suspension geometry on were horrible. The first rig that I did would not climb up anything without either turning over sideways or just flipping back. It is certainly a learning experience on the amount of engineering that the companies have to do to get proper suspension set up. And so along with that gear ratio, I'm really interested to see how good their roll center is. Another benefit to the axles from Axial is that they have a high pinion setup, so you get more ground clearance. Underneath the links and drive shafts, there is basically no drive shaft that would hit. But if we compare this to the Ascender, you can see right there at the bottom, you're going to hit your drive shaft if you smack up onto a rock. So a high pinion setup or twisting your pinion on the rear up can solve that. Now, however, twisting your pinion up has its own consequences. You end up getting harmonics in the drivetrain. At slow rock crawling speeds, maybe not an issue at all. But once you start putting faster motors in, like this 3300 kV Polar Pro, the harmonics in the drivetrain from having a tilted up pinion start to be an issue. So maybe not the best solution for that, but there are solutions for most consumers to get that pinion up and out of the way. Again, going back to the SCX10 II, it comes with a transmission that will allow you to have a 2-speed in there. Doesn't come stock with it, and I am not a fan of 2-speeds in general. Now, the reason for that is the nature of an electric motor. If you want more power or you want more torque, you simply use a larger electric motor. At this point in time, we can have a trail rig that has about 20-mile-an-hour top speeds and still have plenty of low-speed control to handle any sort of technical terrain that we need. Having said that, do we need even more speed than that? Would a 2-speed even make sense if I need more than 20 miles an hour? In my eyes, no. It adds too much lash in the drivetrain, which in the single speed, this drivetrain from the SCX10 II is fantastic. There's hardly any lash, considering that it's, a stock rig straight from Axial. The drivetrain lash in the Vaterra is slightly less because it has the central transmission instead of having the larger transmission with divorced drivetrain. And same for the Trailfinder. Since it's a 2-speed and it has the 2-speed installed, there's a very large amount of drivetrain backlash in that. Not my favorite when I'm wheeling a rig to have to deal with that in sections. And so overall, considering the design and the type of transmission that the SCX10 II has, it has phenomenal backlash. It has a lack of backlash on there. If you wanted to make it even better on that, let's say you're going to build this into a competition rig, you can swap it out for the original SCX10 transmission and go with the parts that you probably have on the shelf, parts that have much less backlash to them because there are less gears in that, and you can move your motor forwards a little bit. I don't think it would really be worth it in the grand scheme of balancing the rig out, but for competition use, the lack of backlash in the old style tranny would be an advantage for sure. Otherwise, I can see there's a lot of potential for the SCX10 II to be harvested for the axles. I don't know about the transmission. It could be really fun on another rig. If I have a trail rig that, let's say, I want to tow stuff with, the 2-speed could come in handy. Have a low gear that goes just 10 miles an hour. My equipment won't get nearly as hot. It won't take nearly as much amperage to pull whatever load is behind me, and still have that 20 mile an hour top gear so that I can do some jumps or whatever the occasion may call for. So the final word on these 3 rigs, I don't think that any of them are bad choices. I would not hesitate to recommend them to anybody if they're looking for a rig. If you're looking for something that is more like a stock rig that you're going to have to wheel to your location, or something that's a scale of your Tacoma, then the Trailfinder 2 is a fantastic choice. It also comes with the 2-speed transmission stock, and so you wouldn't have to buy any additional items to make that happen for you, except for, of course, putting your electronics in. On the Ascender, it also is an aftermarket 2-speed that you would have to buy, but it does have that option. And I would not hesitate to recommend this vehicle to anybody. The amount of torque twist that we experience with a regular rock crawling setup, such as a Crawlmaster 16-turn or Torquemaster 35-turn or Puller Pro 2200 kV, for examples, the torque twist is so minimal that I really didn't even notice it at all until we put that faster motor in there. So just understand that even though it has the downfall of little axle gear down, just 2 to 1, it still has phenomenal suspension geometry on there. So the engineers that made the Ascender really did a great job of working what they could to get that small pumpkin with the low ratio as it may be, but it still performs fantastic. Light years above the first rigs that came out, like the AX10 or even the SCX10 in my opinion. This one has much better suspension geometry out of the box. But when we go to the SCX10 II from Axial, they really just hit all the fine details of the rig. And so if I were only to be able to choose one and I wasn't going for the scale end of it, and I didn't already own an Ascender, I may lean towards buying an SCX10 II first, as long as they're available. They just got released and the supply chain is a little tight. And so I would say if you can get one, go ahead and get one. However, you may not be able to get one and you would still have plenty of fun with an Ascender. Certainly not a bad choice. But with the additional axle ratio, with the nice steering angles, and with the honestly fantastic balance that the stock rig has, even with no battery. It's a 50-50 setup front to rear and 50-50 setup side to side. I'm looking forward to seeing how it handles on the rocks so I can give a much better impression of it. But from the looks on the bench, I'm quite excited and would probably say overall the features that the SCX10 II has right now does set it slightly above the pack. Now, I am excited for this because it means that we're going to have big players now looking to one-up each other in the future. At least I hope that we'll continue seeing this. So more kits with different types of bodies on them. Yeah, we'll probably see that, but I can bet that we're probably going to see another version of this guy with maybe the regular single-speed transmission in there, and we're probably going to see another version of this guy that has either higher axle ratios in there or some other way, such as a gear down on the side that Unimogs use, a gear down on the edge of the axle that would increase the axle ratio. Either way that they could go about it, if they can do it because of this rig is probably going to have to go there now. So in closing, I am excited to play with toys, very excited to play with toys, and it's mostly because of this rig right now. It's been a long time since I have wanted to put together a kit by myself, only by myself. Probably since 2008, since I didn't, hire out a large majority of it to some of my workers to help out with. Say, hey, I'll trade you a motor if you build my rig for me. And most of them are into that, or an hourly wage for all that it really matters. But on this SCX10 II, I built it all myself except for some trimming of the parts off the parts trees, and really just wanted to have it in my hands and see what was up with it. So maybe that will give you some insight on just how cool this rig really is in the grand scheme of things. We went from having to buy multiple kits to cobble together parts to make one rig that performed poorly, to being able to buy rigs like this, which out of the box have excelled pretty much anything that I could build on my own with my own custom chassis and suspension. With that, I would like everybody to go out and play with some toys today. I certainly hope that you spend more time having fun than worrying about toys, because at the end of the day, these guys are just toys. Just toys. They'll be fine. So have a good day and enjoy your evening.